Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're just going to give the rest of the audience another minute or so to join. So we'll be starting about a minute after the top of the hour. Thanks for your patience. Thanks, everyone who's starting to join. We're just going to start in about 30 seconds. Appreciate your patience. All right, I think we can get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining and for your interest in today's webinar between Bamboo Rose and Microsoft, titled Environmental Social Governance Transformation Takes the Entire Retail Community. Before we get started, just some housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please input them in the chat tab in the GoToWebinar pane, and we'll answer those questions at the end of the session. I'm super excited for those questions, so please input those throughout, and we'll get to those. And if we don't, we'll follow up with an email and cover those questions there. So without further ado, I'm excited to get started and introduce our guests today. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Nate Fleming. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Bamboo Rose, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Shanti Rajgopalan, who's the Worldwide Retail and CPG Business Strategy Leader at Microsoft. Shanti, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, Nate. Really great to be here with you all today. And thank you, Nate, Ben, the whole Bamboo Rose team for having me. Very important topic and excited to speak with you all today. Thanks.
Great. And also we have Ben Maiden joining, who's the Director of Product Marketing here at Bamboo Rose. Ben, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks, Nate. Yeah, and just echo Shanti's sentiments. Very exciting subject, and really keen to get into this discussion.
Awesome. Before we get into that discussion, I want to quickly introduce Bamboo Rose to those who aren't familiar. We're the retail industry's leading multi-enterprise product and supply chain platform, and we work with the world's largest retailers and brands, including Walmart, Home Depot, Gap, and Kaufland, to develop, discover, and deliver great products across the globe. On our platform today, we have more than 250,000 users, more than 50,000 companies, again, a mix of our core retail, brand, and manufacturing clients, as well as their many thousands of partners. And more than $1.2 trillion in product is managed on the platform annually. So just a little more on kind of what we do with our client base. Our platform is underpinned by its multi-enterprise architecture. This means we help our core clients engage with dozens of their business partners in real time to drive momentum towards shared business goals and outcomes. Underpinned within that platform are 5 core business applications. The first is our B2B marketplace, which drives transparency and collaboration between retailers and their suppliers on product innovation and strategy, and how retailers are thinking about their upcoming seasons and assortment strategies. And increasingly, those themes involve some level of sustainability and ESG strategy. Next is our PLM application that helps retailers efficiently design and develop great products. More and more clients are using the system to develop products with libraries of sustainable materials to meet emerging ESG requirements, while also accounting for business KPIs like cost and time to market. Next is our sourcing application, which helps clients to work transparently and compliantly with their raw material and finished goods suppliers, ensuring compliance to emerging regulations related to ESG and sustainability. Our purchase order management solution helps our client base to manage financial documentation and drive transparency with partners on consumer demand, production capacity, and logistics handoffs, really driving agility and visibility between our retailers and their suppliers on orders and go-to-market timing. And then finally, our global trade management application supports logistics visibility, financial modeling, landed cost modeling, and compliance by go-to-market geography, including for emerging regulations we're seeing, and we'll talk more about, like the UFLPA, for example, in the US. So that's Bamboo Rose. Now I'll quickly talk about our topic today, to set the stage a little bit. We've seen an incredible amount of momentum around environmental, social, and governance initiatives within our core client base, as well as within the broader retail community over the last several years. we've been working with our clients on maintaining adherence to regulations of this nature for well over a decade. Often working with retailers on standards like the Lacey Act and how that pertains to some of our home improvement clients. But we've seen this pressure gain momentum and accelerate. It really comes across different constituents that our clients are serving or working alongside. So first and foremost would be consumers. Increasingly, consumers prefer to buy products from sustainable brands and retailers. A recent Ernst & Young survey showed that 84% of global consumers say sustainability is important when making purchasing decisions. Next would be investors. The investment community is increasingly interested in ESG. Companies with mature ESG strategies perform better financially. It increasingly shows, and they're also more resilient to risk and supply chain disruption. The same kind of core ability to have transparency and visibility with your supplier base on ESG can also extend to how you manage real-time disruptions or challenges within your supply chain with those same partners, excuse me. And then finally, the last piece is regulation. Whether it's in the European Union, the UK, Canada, the United States, increasingly we're seeing more and more sustainability and ESG related legislation and regulation and disclosure requirements being rolled out. And we'll touch in more depth on those actually on the next slide. So with that, I'll stop talking and I'll kick it over to Ben for the first question today. So Ben, we've seen a flurry of regulatory activity relating to ESG in recent years, and it spans product categories, business models, as well as different regions across the globe, as I mentioned. What major legislation do you both see impacting retailer and brand operations in the near term?
Yeah, thanks, Nate. I think it's interesting that, what we're really seeing from a governance perspective is, the EU regulatory bodies are requiring all significant businesses to report in their quarterly reports from this year, and we know the SEC has proposed disclosures that will be coming soon. So those sort of scope 1, scope 2 level reporting, can really be supported by solutions like Microsoft's Sustainability Cloud. Where we're really focusing on is more those scope 3 supply chain initiatives, and those are really driven by the sorts of claims that people are making around products and understanding what we can say about a product. So a lot of that's been driven by general sort of consumer protection law, but that's starting to evolve into things like the UK's Green Claims Codes, where they're saying, look, if you want to make a statement about your product, you want to say that it's sustainable or more environmentally friendly, then this is the sort of evidence that you need to be able to provide. And so those are the sort of the emerging standards that we're going to have to be able to support, both in terms of what we can say and in terms of what sort of substantiation we're going to need to gather, and that will require a great deal of transparency in the supply chain. That's at the moment obviously a marketing decision. Do you want to say that about your product, and that becomes a choice. Is the claim worth making? It's a balance between the value of that claim and the effort in terms of gathering the information. The regulations that are worrying people the most, I think, is things like the digital product passport, where it's no longer a choice. You're sort of required to be able to make a statement about the circularity of the product, about what impact it's having. And that sort of moves beyond that decision about, well, what is the value to my brand in being able to make these renewable and sustainable statements, and now actually having to be able to make a statement about the impact of the product in order to sell it in places in the world like Europe. So I think it sort of falls into those 3 buckets. It's that top level governance reporting, the choices they're making about what we communicate to our consumers and help them be more informed, and then when we get to those regulations over the next 2 to 5 years of actually being required to make statements about our products, whether we want to or not.
Shanti, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks, Nate. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Ben, that as we see more of this regulation really come to bear, it will require customers to make, businesses to make choices about how they want to really show up and how they can best meet the needs of those regulations. I mean, one thing I think I'll say, though, is, in the food industry, the standardization of food labels really actually helped the entire industry. just have a goal to meet. They had a clear mandate of what they needed to provide. It was easier for them to gather that information. More technology capabilities were developed to help them do that. And consumers had a much easier time of actually evaluating products. I always say, though, that, the food label might tell me how many calories are in the packet of M&Ms, I might still choose to eat those M&Ms. But over time, we know that this consistent labeling will help consumers make better choices. So in some ways, I think the legislation will actually reduce some of the, kind of noise that's in the system right now, because it is so challenging for customers and companies to know, what is the standard they should follow? How should they be representing, kind of the greenness, quote unquote, of their products? So some of that consistency, I think, will really help. And actually, this idea around digital passports is just really interesting for the applications it has across a number of different ESG priorities. I think we'll chat a little bit more about circularity later in this conversation. Just understanding kind of how a product was made, what materials went into it, had it been pre-owned before, all of these things I think will actually drive a lot of value, kind of both to ecosystems as well as to end consumers as they come to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely, Shanti. And I think you made some interesting points there. Specifically, one thing that's interesting to me that we talked about a little bit offline was that sort of visibility into the product, both upstream in terms of how it was developed, but also, past the point of sale downstream in terms of, what's the end of life of that product, what's the recyclability of that product. And I think it segues well to our next theme around circularity, where, increasingly, I think retailers, brands, all sorts of businesses are looking for more visibility into how their customers are relating or interacting with their product after the point of sale. And that's, that can help them build service-based business models, but it can also help them kind of meet some of those emerging requirements around the circularity of their products in the context of an economy that's less focused on one use or limited use products. And so with that, Shanti, I'll hand the next question to you. Politicians and industry luminaries are increasingly focused on building circular economies to reduce environmental impact. How will these aspirations ultimately impact those charged with designing and bringing those consumer products to market, specifically, product development and sourcing teams, as well as broader enterprise teams across the enterprise?
Yeah, I think this opportunity around circularity is really very interesting. One, thinking about how a single product could be manufactured once, but then used several times. And that has value both to the manufacturer, because there's reduced cost kind of associated with each of those uses, but also for consumers who want to see kind of the amount of products that end up in landfills decrease. So it's a really very interesting opportunity. And, I often think of it as one, as you mentioned, we need to improve the technology and the ability to really know kind of what went into a product so that we've got the right plans for how to recycle or reuse it. So a lot of that will be in the transparency of the sourcing and in the manufacturing, and finding ways for that information to really stay with the product. But having kind of created the product, then really the next is, what is not only your initial route to market, but what might be your subsequent routes to market? Thinking about reselling platforms, thinking about resale, re-commerce is really, has already been around in the luxury market for some time, but seeing that in other categories as well. So thinking about your distribution, not only in your kind of first life, but then in subsequent lives, and who that consumer may be. I think one thing that is very interesting we've seen in the luxury market is the buyers of, gently used or pre-loved items are actually a very different audience than those that buy it first. And brands are realizing that it gives them the opportunity to engage with consumers in a completely different way. And when you think about even some things like electronics that, as they're used and reused, it does really create that opportunity for ongoing engagement with the end consumer, whether it is a service model or it is just to assess how you're enjoying the product, really thinking about these as new ways to engage the consumer. So I think we're seeing a lot of opportunity for circularity to create new sourcing capabilities, to create new technology, to really understand what's in products, to think about not only first route to market, but subsequent routes to market, and how that could really change kind of your ongoing relationship with the end consumer. All really good though, because at the end of the day, we do want to have products kind of with extended life and less that ends up being, as I said, kind of put in landfills.
Yeah, Shani, I don't think I had add an awful lot to that, but I think if we just sort of think about the overall impact it's having on these teams, the objective of the politicians, the industry, the regulators, is to drive a more circular economy, and the lever that they're using is to better inform consumers, to shift demand, and that's ultimately what they're aiming to do. So the big question really is, how fast, how rapid will that change be? When consumers do have more information in front of them, will they make more? Will they choose to make those more informed choices? Will they choose to make more sustainable purchases, and engage on that circular economy? I'm sure they will. I mean, we leverage these terms now. We make these claims about our products now because we believe consumers value them. But as more information becomes available and consumers are able to make more informed decisions, will they make those? Will they drive the businesses to become more efficient more quickly? I was at the London College of Fashion a few weeks ago, having a similar conversation, and the dean there actually raised an interesting project where they were actually one of their graduate students was building a tool where, as a consumer is making purchases online, it was informing them of alternate products that might be a more sustainable option, and actually measuring what shift in consumer behaviour that actually would drive. And I think that will be a very interesting study to see, well, what when the information is available to the consumer in a more consistent way, what choices do those consumers make? Do they still value the dollar more than the impact? And of course, I think it will change, but it's just a question of what's the pace.
Absolutely. And I think we're starting to see, glimpses or blips of that change in consumer behavior. If I just think about myself, Urban Outfitters is a client of Bamboo Rose, and my wife actually uses their sort of monthly rental service called Nuuly. And then I actually this morning, without even thinking about this webinar, was on Patagonia's website and then clicked over to look at jackets that had actually been reacquired by Patagonia. Patagonia had refurbished, and then they were reselling. So I do think we're starting to see more momentum here. And just, one thing to build off there, it gives these organizations a chance to diversify their revenue streams, right? Shanti, you talked about this a little bit. It's a different customer segment. It's a slightly different business model. In the case of Nuuly with Urban Outfitters, it's more service-based. So I think that, that's ultimately a direction a lot of these organizations want to go, are going to need to go, service-based business models, extending that relationship with the customer, recurring revenue. And I think if you think about circular economies, there's a lot of really interesting connections there. So we just talked about kind of the consumer and more visibility into the consumer. I think next we can kind of think about a really key partner to retailers, which of course is the supplier. And obviously there's a lot of connection and need for visibility with your supplier base as you're maturing your ESG strategies. So Ben, a question for you. Our clients are increasingly looking to expand visibility and transparency into several tiers of their supply chain and supplier base. How are you seeing Bamboo Rose clients achieve this? And are there benefits for those clients beyond ESG compliance and reduced risk in extending that visibility and transparency?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's a lot of technologies coming on the market and being implemented into the supply chain to try to digitally capture more information and more visibility. And often the biggest question that always comes up is verification. So whilst a fairly mature supply chain can be highly digitally connected, your suppliers and your factories and your farms and everybody involved can participate on a single platform or multiple platforms and gather all this information, it still comes usually down to some sort of physical verification. How do I actually know that the information they're providing is accurate? And then maybe some of the parties in your organization or in your supply chain aren't as sophisticated, and there might be an organic cotton farm in a third world part of the world that don't have access to that sort of technology. And so, obviously it requires investment from the larger retailers and from governments to sort of enable that as part of that supply chain to make sure they can gather that information as accurately as possible. I think, it's the same, the value drive obviously is very much, we're sort of seeing historically has been about driving efficiencies and driving down costs and trying to improve on time in full delivery performance to make sure we can have more predictable supply chain and more agile supply chain. So we've been trying to do that for many years. We kind of see the ESG element as actually being almost being a secondary benefit, but now it's such a big driver that I think that it will sort of break down the walls that have been there for so long of getting those broader networks together to actually realize the value that we think's always been there, and at the same time try to solve these ESG challenges.
Yeah, Ben, I think that's so true, that it was always, kind of you run your business and think about like sustainability. But I think what we're really seeing is, as you said, the vice versa. It's like the need to really instrument the supply chain, really understand where those products are coming from, the behavior, the delivery, the composition of your supplier base actually has really great business benefits as well. There's the old adage you see on the slide here as well that, what gets measured gets managed. And it's so true. As we have been driving more transparency into the supply chain, it's actually uncovering insights that are having operational benefits as well. In today's day and age, where there are so many challenges in the supply chain, and a given supplier may or may not be able to meet your needs, the kind of ability to really track and trace that supply chain and to know where do you have bottlenecks, or where do you need to have more supplier diversity, or where is there an opportunity to be more agile in your ordering. All of this data that's being collected throughout this ecosystem can really help with operational benefits as well. And one other thing that I'll just say is we do hope that IoT sensors and other data capture mechanisms that can make this easier, more passive, closer to the source of emissions will really be the key to getting this data flowing more freely throughout the supply chain. Prior to working at Microsoft, I was part of a consumer products company where we were, helping people kind of track their activity and fitness level. And we had an application where you could enter in kind of the food items that you had consumed to help balance that with your activity level. And it's really hard. It's very hard to kind of continually input your food in a food diary, although there's so much evidence that that really helps with your overall health. And so one of the things we realized is, we have to make it more passive to track that information. We have to make it easier for people to say, yes, I had the same thing that I ate yesterday. Yes, I was able to take a picture, and then from that, guess what the item was and estimate the calories. So anything we can do to make these things less of a manual effort, collect the data more in real time, closer to the source, I think will also be very helpful for getting the kind of information we need both to impact sustainability goals as well as overall operational, efficiency.
Absolutely, Shanti. And I think, you brought up a great point there down the stretch. We need to make the reporting and verification and access to the technology that the supplier base and the second or third tier supplier base need to report on. We need to make that accessible to them. And that's a big part of kind of our platform architecture at Bamboo Rose, was to drive fundamental business value, not just for those core clients in the retail and consumer goods industries, but also all of their partners. And if you create a system that's engaging and valuable for all members of the supply chain, then you're going to see better data quality. You're going to see deeper relationships between the buyer and the supplier. And it's also going to just drive some fundamental business values for that supplier partner as well. They might get better visibility on orders. They can align orders earlier with production capacity. They can work on acquiring raw materials more proactively, potentially at better prices. They can accelerate or tighten handoffs with some of the downstream logistics partners of the retailer. And all these things drive shared value, right? They're going to allow, maybe more capacity for the supplier. They're going to get products to market more quickly, which is great for everyone. So I think it's important to think about how retailers are providing technology that allow their partners to keep pace and adhere and comply with some of these emerging regulations and expectations. So yeah, interesting topic. So next, I want to talk a little bit about sort of, how do you disclose and report on your operations, and especially, the impact of your operations and your partners' operations. The question here for Shanti, I'll let you lead off on this one, is we've seen retail leaders like Walmart make huge strides in terms of transparency on their environmental impact. A great example, of course, being Project Gigaton. How can other retailers and brands start to document and monitor the impact of their operations and their partners' operations, and even their partners' operations on the environment, and start to expose that to regulatory bodies as well as consumers?
Yeah, thanks, Nate. I mean, this is really a tough one, and I'll say I'm really happy to see Walmart and other leaders in the industry really, kind of take the lead here. It does take a lot of resources, and it takes kind of a broad supply chain and kind of, the power, if you will, to really help influence that supply chain to make this happen. I think one of the things we hear from a lot of retailers is because of the diversity of their supply chains, many will report their emissions, say in an email or, kind of best case via an Excel spreadsheet. And it leads to a lot of manual data entry. It leads to a lot of manual kind of data aggregation and normalization. I was speaking with one retailer who said, the supplier reported their emissions in cases. And she's just like, cases is not a standard unit of measure. Like, at least give me gallons or something that I can use across the others in my supply base. So one of the things we're really focused on here at Microsoft is this idea of a kind of open source and common data model around emissions data. So if we can make it easier for retailers to publish, kind of a way in which they would like the data to be reported, we do think it'll be easier to start to bring that together, actually spot patterns, be able to do the kinds of calculations needed to do this level of multi-tier reporting. So again, really glad to see the large retailers in the space taking the lead on this. And hopefully, if they're able to provide the tools, invest in some of these common models, help to make some of the reporting a bit more standardized across multiple tiers of the supply chain. Once those suppliers have sufficiently kind of digitized and standardized their reporting, they should be able to provide the same for all the retailers that they do business with. So we hope this has like a multiplying impact across the industry. If you can digitize a supplier once, they can report that to multiple upstream sources all at once.
Yeah, I think that consistency in reporting is really important. I think one of the things we see is obviously the first hurdle is organisations making a decision to engage in these sorts of initiatives and actually try to drive a more efficient supply chain. And of course, that comes down to what value, what that costs and what they see as the value to the brand, and ultimately, how people perceive their organisation. But then, of course, once they make that decision to undertake an initiative like Gigaton or other projects, maybe it's trying to find more sustainable materials for your products, is obviously tracking that initiative, actually rolling it out, making sure that everybody who's participating can verify that they're participating and meet the hurdles that you've set for them. But then having that information in a way, in a place where it can be used day to day to support business decisions. So as we build a healthier, if you like, supply chain that is more capable and is more sustainable, that we can start to drive business decisions about, well, what product am I going to buy from which supplier and what material am I going to use? Actually having that information in front of the people who are making those decisions, so that the net result of that initiative is actually realized throughout the entire business. So if we might have a program that says, let's get these suppliers onto a more efficient electricity supply, or let's find mills that can that use less water in their fabric processing, then if that information isn't available and in front of the people who are designing the product or sourcing the product, then that benefit isn't ultimately realizing its full potential. So we just think that obviously the consistency in the way that we understand what we're measuring and how we're setting up those hurdles for suppliers to become more efficient, and then how do we ensure people are informed about those metrics, and also how do we incentivize suppliers engage in a more sustainable business model. So we've seen some organisations try to incentivise suppliers with more favourable terms if they meet a series of sustainable metrics, or just simply, favouring them when it comes to awarding business. But that information has to be in front of the people who are making those decisions.
Ben, I totally agree, and I think one of the things that we view as differentiating about Bamboo Rose in the context of ESG is that we've been helping our clients to manage operational data, manage partner data for decades, and the ability to bring ESG data points and mesh that with your existing operational data and business data, I think is really important for driving kind of hybrid value. Which again sort of segues well to our next question. As we look at where the economy is today, some of the fears that governments and financial institutions and enterprises across industries have about the potential that we're already in a recession, or that there's an impending recession, maybe a little bit of eroding consumer confidence as well. In the past, I think at times that has slowed down ESG initiatives. But I think we're in a different place here in 2022. And so I'm curious, Ben, what your thoughts are in terms of some of these economic headwinds and what they might mean for some of the ESG momentum that's built up over the last several years.
Yeah, I mean, as you pointed out at the beginning, the imperative to drive a more sustainable supply chain, is driven by consumers, regulators, governments. It's all, it continues to increase the pressure. But I don't think we should view sustainability or circularity as an economic concession. I think it's an issue that as we build better visibility in our supply chain in order to achieve some of these ESG goals and reporting requirements. As we spoke earlier, it actually means that we would have opportunities to be more agile and have a better understanding of our supply chain. But this idea that sort of sustainability and circularity is a offsets to our margin. I think we have this innate sort of understanding of what is organic, recycled, sustainable is in air quotes more expensive, because we've been told that by retailers for decades. When we go in and go to the supermarket and buy some groceries, the products on the shelf, one of them is a regular product, and then the one next to it might be organic, and we have to pay more for that. And so we've got this innate understanding that these things are inherently more expensive because we have placed value on them, and because we have marketed that value to consumers in order to drive our margins. So it's obviously true that there's certain materials in the supply chain that are in higher demand because of that, and that they are therefore more expensive. But the availability of things like organic cotton has grown substantially in the last 20 years. So the supply will ultimately catch up and meet that demand. But it's not that we have to constantly sort of view these in competition. I think it's more important that we think about this as in the same way that we try to inform our consumers about the impact of the products that they're buying, that we are informing our own business about what is the impact of the products that we're offering, so that we can make informed decisions about which products we're actually going to bring into our business. I think we were talking before about how that will affect your businesses, your retail businesses, and the need to sort of think about, well, what's it going to look like in 10 years' time? The demand for single-use, throwaway, consumable products is decreasing, and what is our various business models going to look like? I mean, we're going to need to think about in the EU, for example, there's a right to repair. So what's the retail's opportunities to be involved in that? Engage in second-hand reuse of products, reuse markets, and even product as a service, as you mentioned before, Nate. So there's lots of different opportunities that will change the face of retail in different ways. But I don't think we need to think of it as a trade-off that it's one or the other. Ultimately, a circular economy is a more efficient economy. That's what we're trying to drive towards.
I think that's so true, Ben. I think this idea of the trade-off does put us in a position where it's like you choose one or the other. But if we actually think about really sustainability almost as like a triangle of factors, if you think about the consumer demand and your ability to better meet the changing needs of consumers, be able to capture more share of wallet, be more relevant in the products that you are developing and marketing, there's kind of the consumer side of the triangle. And there is, of course, also the regulation side of the triangle. As we spoke about earlier, we do anticipate that regulation will actually move some of these forward to a place where you don't really have the option to choose not to comply with some of these sustainability standards. But when we look at the consumer side of the demand, the regulatory pressure, the interesting kind of third part of that triangle actually is investors. And many companies are seeing that there are opportunities to actually unlock kind of financial investment, either in the form of loans or even, groups that are really trying to improve the overall sustainability of a supply chain. There's investment that can be unlocked with this move towards, greener choices. There's also quite a bit that retailers can do to create incentives for those suppliers to take up greener practices with the opportunity to invest in their communities. So thinking about kind of the social element as well, how can the right investments, kind of the right financing of supply chains actually improve the economic conditions of all the people in those communities? So when we actually look at the forces that are really driving this, the combination of consumers, of regulatory pressure, and then opportunities that are really coming from the investment, arena, where we can make choices that are both better for the planet as well as better for business, better for our consumers, better for the constituents, kind of contributing to the supply chain. That is really where I hope we will create momentum so that there's actually multiple forces that are driving to the behavior that we really want. And as you said, over time, really making it less of a trade-off so that it feels, one is a winning choice and the other is a losing choice. Helping create more winning scenarios across all of those constituents.
Yeah, Shanti, I think the triangle point is a great one. And I for one, am very interested to see, what the SEC rolls out in the next year or so in terms of ESG reporting and how that evolves, what retailers and other enterprises, what data points they have to elevate, when they have to elevate them, and if that brings a little more consistency to the market. So Shanti and Ben, thank you so much for your inputs and thoughts on these topics today. We have had a few questions come through while we've been holding the webinar. So one centers on kind of data quality. How can retailers be more confident in the quality of their operational data as well as the data that their partners are providing? Ben, I know that we help clients with this at Bamboo Rose. I'm not sure if you have a point of view there.
Well, I think it really comes down to two factors. There's triangulation. So, if somebody is providing a piece of information to us, is there ways that we can verify that through a third party? And the second is verification. So, actually sending inspectors, gathering evidence that the claim that's been made is true. So we do that through inspections, we do it through testing, we do it through physical evaluations. All of that it nearly always boils down to somebody actually having a look at it. Of course, that can't be done on every single case, so I think just cost prohibitive, but we can at least survey and make sure that we're gathering enough information to be able to determine the level of accuracy of the information we do hold.
I think that point on inspection is so true. Ben, I heard a great phrase the other day that, people may not always do what you expect, but they will always do what you inspect. So I do think some level of verification in the early days will be necessary to ensure the data is accurate and that it's being reported appropriately. But as we've, kind of talked about over the course of the last few minutes, I think there are opportunities for the technology to make it easier. So both in terms of how the data is captured, whether sensors or other technology could be used to make that easier, kind of less error prone, less manual. Also thinking about virtual verification. Over the course of the last few years, we've managed to do everything from beauty appointments to telehealth virtually, thinking about the role that technology can play even in helping to do those verifications. If too expensive or not practical to send someone, how we can still ensure that that is accurate information. And then the third, I think, is the incentives. How do you make it beneficial for the supplier, perhaps by aggregating some of those insights and giving them information back? You think about farming in particular as a, kind of profession that has been passed on from time to time, and how technology could improve, yield rates or crop health. The opportunity to share some of that data back to those suppliers could be a good reason for them to be more motivated to provide data accurately, timely, and kind of in the right level of granularity.
Great points. And one more question coming through. So there was a mention earlier of enabling operators with data that they need to support ESG initiatives. So kind of giving them the right new data sources to help them make decisions. What has been, Shanti, in your experience, what has been the broad operator reaction to new access to new ESG data points, as well as new ESG requirements within their day-to-day job?
Well, I mean, I think the broader question is, how does your organization use data to make decisions? I think what we see is a bigger kind of cultural transformation in organizations to trust data, to use data in making data-driven decisions. So in the context of that broader, kind of mindset of really thinking about how data can help improve business outcomes, this is yet another data point. And so I think two things that come to mind for us are, one, ensuring that data is properly organized and governed. You want to make sure you've got data that is appropriate for that operator in their hands. And the second is really using, kind of smart workflow tools and business intelligence tools to give that operator the information they need at the moment and in the right fidelity to make that decision. So it may not help an operator to have information that requires immediate action if they don't actually have the ability to do it. And vice versa, they may be at a point of decision, but if the information is available in a report that comes out once a month, it's not going to be helpful for them to make that decision in the moment. So I think really thinking about what data is needed and what frequency, what fidelity, having the right set of tools in your organization to put that data in the hands of those decision makers, and the right overall data strategy and kind of mindset about using data to make decisions can all really help here.
Great, thank you, Shanti. So I think we're going to wrap up there. Shanti, Ben, thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciated your thoughts on this exciting topic. More broadly, for those attending, if you want to learn more about how Bamboo Rose supports industry-leading retailers in their environmental, social, and governance maturity and adherence to emerging regulations in that space, please feel free to reach out to us. Our contact email is info@bamboorose.com. You can visit our website at bamboorose.com. We'll also, of course, be sending a recording of this webinar to those who attended, and there will be a schedule a meeting link in there as well. If you'd like to talk to us and learn more, connect with Ben, connect with some of our other industry consultants on this topic. We'd love to talk more. Additionally, it's that time of year. We'll be at NRF in New York City in January. We're at booth 3966, and we hope we could see you there as well to talk about this topic and other topics. So again, thank you all for joining. Thanks for your attention, and look forward to talking to you next time.
Thank you so much, Nate. Really appreciate the opportunity to join Bamboo Rose today. So happy to have you as a partner and providing these great capabilities to our mutual customers. So thank you all, and yes, look forward to seeing you at NRF.
Thanks, Shanti.